Welcome to Shatter.
Help me reach 5,000 subscribers. Support the video with a like and leave your thoughts in the comments. You'll get intimacy when I feel like it. That was the exact sentence she dropped on me across our kitchen island. 14 years of marriage, boiled down to a single declaration that felt less like rejection and more like a verdict. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't even look at me. She just smirked, eyes glued to her phone, scrolling like I was background noise in my own house. And me? I didn't shout, didn't demand an explanation. I smiled, a quiet, strange smile that wasn't bitter or sarcastic. It was clarity, a line in the sand I hadn't realized I was ready to draw. In that moment, the man she thought she knew, the predictable, dependable husband, died. I didn't slam the door or throw a plate. I just walked away, letting her believe she had won another small war. She didn't know it yet, but I wasn't retreating. I was exiting. That night, she slid into bed, back turned as usual, phone glowing in her hand. I lay there staring at the ceiling, my side of the bed cold and wide like the edge of a cliff. My mind wasn't racing with panic. It was moving with precision. I replayed every small moment I'd ignored. The eye rolls, the sudden silences, the way she laughed harder at her coworkers' texts than at my jokes. All those little signs I had chalked up to stress, hormones, phases. Lies I told myself so I could keep pretending. But that sentence ended the pretending. She wasn't offering love on her own terms anymore. She was declaring ownership, dictating when and if I was worth something. And for the first time in years, I realized how pathetic I must have looked, fighting for scraps she didn't even want to give. The next morning, I didn't make her coffee, didn't kiss her forehead, didn't ask how she slept. I left before she even woke up, sat in my car with a paper cup of black coffee, and just breathed. It felt like the first real breath I'd taken in months. She thought she had me cornered, chained to her indifference. But silence was my weapon now. At work, no one knew. I smiled through meetings, cracked jokes at lunch, but underneath, I was laying foundations, shifting bank accounts, making lists, planning a life where she didn't exist. Every quiet move I made was another brick pulled from the castle she thought was untouchable. That night, she noticed. I came home later than usual, gym bag slung over my shoulder. She was waiting on the couch in her robe, Netflix paused like she was setting a scene. She said I was late. I told her I didn't realize there was a curfew. She blinked at me, caught off guard by the calmness in my tone, by the lack of guilt she was used to seeing in my face. For the first time in a long time, she looked unsettled. And that was when I knew. She could sense the ground shifting. But she didn't understand yet. I wasn't trying to win her back. I wasn't fighting for a marriage she had already buried. I was preparing to vanish from her world so completely that one day she'd wake up and realize I had been leaving long before she ever noticed. When she finally asked if I was okay, I smiled again. Better than I've been in a long time. She didn't realize it, but that was the first warning. The storm wasn't coming with thunder. It was already here, silent, dismantling everything she thought she controlled. The change started small, almost invisible, like a draft slipping through a cracked window. I stopped reaching for her hand on the couch, stopped sending her those little midday texts that once made her smile. I no longer hovered in the kitchen asking if she wanted coffee or reminding her about errands. To anyone else, it might have looked like routine fatigue. To me, it was deliberate. Every withheld gesture was a quiet blade cutting the strings she thought still bound me. At first, she didn't notice. She was too wrapped up in her glowing screen, the constant scroll of validation from people who weren't me. She assumed my silence was the same old silence, the kind I had always filled with patience while waiting for her to come back around. But this wasn't waiting anymore. It was drifting. And drifting is dangerous, because once a man stops orbiting, he doesn't stay suspended. He escapes. I started leaving the house earlier, long before she came into the kitchen with that absent stare. I'd sit in my car outside the gym, coffee steaming against the cold morning air, just savoring the space between me and her. That distance felt like oxygen. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel suffocated. One night, I came home later than usual. Dinner was already done, takeout containers still on the counter. She sat on the couch in a silk robe, wine glass in hand, like she'd been waiting for a cue in a play. She said I was late. I told her I hadn't realized we lived by a clock. Her eyes snapped up, searching for sarcasm, for an apology she had trained me to give. But I didn't offer either. I cleaned up the counter in silence, stacking boxes, rinsing glasses. She asked if I was okay. I told her I was better than I'd been in a long time. That one sentence rattled her more than any fight ever could. Over the next few days, the cracks began to show. She lingered near me in the kitchen, her voice softer, testing for a reaction. She wore lingerie to bed, something she hadn't done in over a year, as if fabric alone could erase the distance she'd built brick by brick. I noticed, of course, but I didn't acknowledge it. My silence was a mirror, and she was finally seeing herself in it. Soon, the tests escalated. She cooked dinner from scratch, set the table with candles, trying to recreate a memory we had lost long ago. I ate quietly, thanked her politely, then pushed my chair back without touching her hand when she reached for mine. Her smile froze, her eyes darting down like she'd just touched fire. That was the moment I knew it was working. The woman who once dictated when I was allowed affection was now tasting her own medicine, and the bitterness was starting to choke her. I knew the exact moment she began to feel it. It wasn't dramatic, no shouting, no begging, but it was there, hiding in the spaces between her words. She called me at work, something she hadn't done in months. Her voice was light, too light, like she was trying to sound casual. She said she just wanted to hear my voice. I paused long enough for the silence to stretch, then asked if everything was okay. She laughed nervously, said she missed me, then hung up before I could respond. That was when I realized it wasn't affection she wanted. It was control slipping through her fingers. That night, I came home late again, deliberately. She was dressed up, makeup done, hair curled, like she had been preparing for a date. Only the date was with me, and I hadn't agreed to it. She suggested we go out, mentioned a new restaurant she'd been wanting to try. I took off my jacket calmly and told her I'd already eaten. The flicker of panic in her eyes was almost imperceptible, but I caught it. She masked it with a quick smile, offered tomorrow instead. I nodded once, said maybe, and walked upstairs without another word. 2 days later, I began the financial shift. Quiet, precise, invisible to her at first. I redirected part of my paycheck into a separate account, one she didn't have access to. I canceled subscriptions she didn't even realize I was paying for. That night, she tried to open Netflix and found the account inactive. She called out from the living room that something was wrong. I didn't answer. She waited, expecting me to fix it, but I let the silence swallow her voice. It was a small move, but it mattered, because her power had always been built on my willingness to maintain the stage she performed on. And now, piece by piece, I was dismantling it. She noticed other things, too. My clothes were different. I started going to the gym more often, buying shirts that actually fit, jeans that made me look sharper. I was sleeping better, walking taller. She asked who I was spending time with, her voice coated in forced indifference. I told her just people. That one word hit harder than any accusation. Because she knew. She wasn't my orbit anymore. She was background noise. One evening, I caught her rifling through my laundry, pretending to fold shirts that didn't need folding. Her hands lingered in my pockets, checking receipts, searching for evidence. I didn't say a word. I let her dig, let her drown in the ambiguity she had once used against me. This wasn't revenge. It was revelation. I wasn't angry, I wasn't hurt. I was simply done. And the scariest man in the world isn't the one who yells or begs. It's the one who has stopped caring, yet still sleeps beside you in silence. I didn't expect to find anything that night, but I checked anyway. She had left her phone charging on the kitchen counter while she took a shower. For months, she had been guarding that device like it was an extension of her skin. Now it was lying there, unprotected, the screen glowing with notifications. My hand hovered over it for a second, not out of fear of what I'd find, but out of certainty. I already knew. I unlocked it easily. She had never changed the code. And within seconds, the proof was staring back at me. Messages with a contact saved under a fake name. The words were short, cautious, but I didn't need explicit details to see what was happening. She was laughing at things she never laughed at when I spoke. She was sharing parts of herself she hadn't given me in years. I didn't rage. I didn't throw the phone. I locked the screen, set it back exactly how she'd left it, and walked away. When she came out of the shower, humming as if her world was still intact, I was sitting calmly on the couch, scrolling through the news. She never suspected a thing. And that was the moment I realized just how blind she had become. She thought she still owned the narrative. but I had already taken it from her. Over the next week, I turned my detachment into strategy. I stopped being her safety net. I let her texts sit unanswered for hours. I stopped fixing the things she relied on me for: the squeaky cabinet door, the Wi-Fi outage, the stack of unopened mail on the counter. She was forced to scramble, to taste the chaos of a life without me holding it together. The smallest inconveniences became cracks in the image she tried to project. She wanted independence, so I gave it to her in full measure, and she was already choking on it. One night, she tried again. She poured 2 glasses of wine, set them on the coffee table, and smiled at me like we were still newlyweds. She said she thought it would be nice if we talked. I glanced at the glasses, then at her, and told her I was heading to bed. The look on her face wasn't disappointment anymore. It was fear, because for the first time, she realized she was losing something she couldn't control. I lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, listening as she quietly put the glasses away, her footsteps heavier than usual. And I felt something I hadn't felt in years: peace. Because I wasn't scrambling anymore, wasn't fighting to be chosen. I was already gone, and she was the last one to notice. The next morning, she asked if I still loved her. I looked at her calmly, smiled, and told her the truth without saying a word. My silence was louder than any confession could have been. The shift became undeniable the night she came into the bedroom late, dressed carefully, makeup on even though she had nowhere to go. She slid under the covers and whispered a soft goodnight, something she hadn't done in months. I didn't answer. My breathing stayed steady, eyes fixed on the ceiling. She lay there waiting, the silence pressing down on her like weight, until eventually she rolled over and reached for her phone. That was her comfort now: the screen, the endless scroll, the illusion of connection. But even that wasn't working anymore. She was restless, tossing, turning, sighing louder than usual, like she wanted to provoke a reaction. I gave her none, because the truth was, I had already crossed a line in my mind. I was no longer living with my wife. I was observing a stranger who once had the power to undo me with a smile, but now couldn't get me to lift my head. Days passed, and her efforts grew more desperate. She started texting me during the day again, little things she never bothered with before. She asked if I wanted dinner, if I needed anything, if I'd be home late. I replied politely, but my words were clipped, efficient, designed to close the door rather than open it. She sent a picture of the cat curled on the couch, something she used to do when we were happy. I typed back a single word: nice. She read it instantly, but there was no reply. For the first time, she was the one left waiting. That weekend, she suggested a drive to the lake, just the two of us. She reminded me how we used to go there when we were dating, how it had been our place. I told her I already had plans. She froze at that word, plans, like it was foreign in my mouth. She asked with who. I shrugged, said just people. She wanted details, but I didn't give them. And for a woman who had built her power on controlling the story, ambiguity was a weapon sharper than truth. That night, I caught her pacing the kitchen, muttering under her breath. She thought I couldn't hear, but every word carried. She asked herself why I was acting so cold, why I didn't seem to care anymore. She even accused me, in the privacy of her own head, of seeing someone else. I almost laughed from the other room, because she still didn't get it. I wasn't leaving for another woman. I was leaving for myself. When I finally walked into the kitchen, she went silent. She searched my face for a clue, some softness, some weakness to exploit. I gave her nothing. I poured myself a glass of water, set it down, and left without a word. Her reflection in the window told me everything. She was beginning to understand. She wasn't fighting for love anymore. She was fighting against silence, and losing. It didn't take long for her cracks to widen into something she couldn't disguise. She started lingering by the door when I came home, watching me with eyes that searched for answers I wasn't giving. She commented on my clothes, my cologne, the way I looked sharper than before. She asked who I was trying to impress. I told her no one. The truth was, I wasn't trying to impress anyone at all. I was rediscovering myself, the version of me she had buried under years of indifference. One evening, she cooked again, a full dinner like she hadn't made in months. She set the table, lit a candle, and waited. I sat, ate quietly, thanked her, and then went back to my laptop without a word of praise. When her hand brushed mine across the table, I didn't flinch this time. I simply pulled away as though the contact had been accidental. Her smile collapsed instantly, her face tightening as she looked down at her plate. For the first time, she was the one feeling invisible. That night, she tried something new. She came into the bedroom dressed in the lingerie I had once bought her, back when intimacy was still ours. She didn't say anything, just waited for my reaction. I glanced at her once, then rolled over, my eyes fixed on the wall. The silence between us stretched so wide it could have swallowed the house. She turned out the light a few minutes later, but I could hear her breathing, shallow and uneven, like she was suffocating under her own game. Meanwhile, I was building something she couldn't see. I had shifted my finances completely now. Separate accounts, private investments. Even the car insurance was under my name alone. Every thread she once leaned on was slipping out of her grasp, but she didn't know it yet. I was making myself untouchable. Her desperation surfaced in the smallest ways. She started checking my phone when I left it unattended, something she'd never bothered with before. She went through my laundry again, digging for receipts that might explain the late nights and the new energy in me. I watched her from the doorway once, pretending not to notice, and the panic in her movements told me everything. She was terrified, not of losing me, but of losing control. The irony was almost poetic. She had once dictated when affection was available, tossing crumbs my way as if I should be grateful. Now, she was standing in the ruins of her own arrogance, waiting for attention I had no intention of giving. I had stopped fighting for her months ago. Now, I was simply erasing her. Quietly, carefully, without ceremony. And the silence was louder than any revenge I could have chosen. The unraveling became obvious when she finally broke her own rules. She had always prided herself on being untouchable, the one who controlled the tempo of affection, the one who withheld as leverage. But now, she was chasing. One evening, she showed up at my office unexpectedly with lunch in her hands, something she had never done in her life. She smiled too wide, spoke too fast, asking about my coworkers, about projects she'd ignored for years. I thanked her politely, ate a few bites, then slid the container aside. She waited for me to say more, to bridge the gap, but I didn't. She left with that same forced smile, and I could see the humiliation in her eyes as she walked out the door. Her panic only grew from there. She began calling me in the middle of the day, her voice high and rehearsed, pretending she just wanted to check in. But I could hear it, the tremor, the urgency. She was terrified that I was no longer orbiting around her. And she was right. I wasn't. One night, I stayed out later than usual, no explanation given. When I walked through the door, she was sitting on the couch, wine glass in hand, eyes sharp and searching. She asked where I'd been. I shrugged, told her I was out. With who? She asked, her tone too casual to be real. Just people, I answered, my face unreadable. Her jaw tightened, her knuckles whitening around the glass. For years, she had thrown that same vague answer at me. Now, she was the one left drowning in it. The irony was bitter, and I let her taste every drop. She began hovering near me, testing my patience with sudden kindness. She folded my laundry, something she had refused to do for years. She asked if I wanted to watch a movie, sat closer on the couch, tried to rest her head on my shoulder. I stood up mid-scene, saying I was tired, and left her staring at the empty space I'd left behind. She was unraveling, but she still didn't understand. She thought this was about another woman, about jealousy, about me trying to make her pay. But that was never it. I wasn't leaving for someone else. I was leaving because she had already left years ago, and I was done pretending otherwise. The silence had shifted. At first, it was mine to endure. Now it was hers, and the weight of it was finally crushing her. She wasn't fighting to keep me anymore. She was fighting against the echo of her own choices. And no matter how hard she tried, there was no undoing it. The turning point came when I finally stopped hiding my detachment. Until then, it had been subtle, a quiet erosion she could dismiss as a phase. But that night, I let her see the truth. I walked in late, gym bag still over my shoulder, and she was waiting at the kitchen table with a full meal laid out. Candles flickered, wine already poured, like she was staging a photograph of the marriage she wanted others to believe we still had. She smiled too brightly, told me she thought it would be nice if we had dinner together like old times. I sat down, ate slowly, thanked her, then stood up before the candles had even burned halfway. She asked if I was leaving already, her voice cracking beneath the false sweetness. I looked at her, steady and calm, and told her I was tired. No excuses, no softness, just truth. The silence that followed was heavier than any argument we had ever had. Later that night, I heard her in the bathroom, muffling her sobs under running water. Years ago, I would have gone to her, asked what was wrong, held her until she calmed down. Now I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening, detached. I felt nothing. Not pity, not anger, not love. Only confirmation that the distance was final. The next morning, she tried again. She asked if I still wanted this marriage, if I still loved her. Her voice shook as if the answer would decide her future. I looked at her and smiled. Not cruelly, not sarcastically, just calmly. My silence was the only answer she got, and it shattered her more than any spoken rejection could have. From that moment on, she shifted into survival mode. She began hovering around me constantly, asking where I was going, when I'd be home, what I was doing. But the questions weren't born of love. They were born of fear. Fear that I was already gone. And she was right. I had been gone for weeks. At work, I set up a new apartment. I signed the lease quietly, transferred funds, and furnished it with care. While she was busy clinging to the ruins of what she thought she still owned, I was building a new life she knew nothing about. Each move was deliberate, each step calculated, and every detail was hidden behind the mask of my silence. She thought intimacy was hers to grant, affection hers to control. But what she didn't understand was this. Once a man stops asking, once he withdraws completely, there's no bargaining left. She was only beginning to realize that her words in that kitchen had been the start of her own undoing. And now, it was too late to take them back. The day I started moving things out of the house, she didn't even notice. That's how blind she had become. I began with the essentials, documents, clothes, a few valuables, and carried them out piece by piece, hidden in plain sight. Each morning before work, I placed another bag in the trunk of my car. Each night, I returned lighter, freer, while she scrolled on her phone in the living room, oblivious to the quiet dismantling of the life she thought she still controlled. She grew suspicious, of course. The panic in her eyes was harder to disguise now. She asked if I was seeing someone, if my late nights meant another woman. I told her no, calm and steady. And I wasn't lying. There was no one else. There was only me, the man she had forgotten, rediscovered in the silence she could no longer escape. One evening, she cornered me in the kitchen. Her voice cracked as she asked if I was unhappy, if I wanted out. I rinsed my glass, set it on the counter, and told her I was fine. That word, fine, cut deeper than any accusation could have. Because she could hear what I didn't say. She knew I was done. The next weekend, she tried one last time to pull me back into her orbit. She suggested we host friends for dinner, said it would be good for us, that people hadn't seen us together in a while. I agreed, but for reasons she didn't understand. I let her set the stage, invite the guests, polish the illusion of a happy marriage. When the night came, I played my part perfectly. I laughed at the right moments, clinked glasses, and let her bask in the image she wanted to project. But I also watched her crumble quietly, because she could see it in my eyes. I wasn't hers anymore. After the guests left, she confronted me, anger replacing fear. She asked how I could sit there smiling, pretending, when I was so distant. I told her I wasn't pretending, and that silence afterward was the loudest I had ever heard our house. She stormed upstairs, and I remained in the living room, staring at the empty wine glasses and the crumbs of a performance that had finally collapsed. That night, I didn't sleep in our bed. I stayed on the couch, the lease to my new apartment folded neatly in my jacket pocket. I had already signed it, already moved half my life there. And as I lay in the silence, I realized the truth. I was no longer disappearing. I was already gone. She had once thought she could ration affection like a gift. But now, she was the one starving in the famine she created. And soon, she would discover just how complete my absence could be. The final morning was unremarkable to anyone else, but I knew it was the end. She was still in bed when I got dressed, scrolling her phone, pretending not to watch me. I moved with calm precision, sliding my watch onto my wrist, folding my jacket over my arm. I didn't pack a suitcase. That had been done weeks earlier. What I carried out of that house wasn't luggage. It was the last fragments of myself she would ever see. She asked where I was going, her voice casual but cracked at the edges. I told her I had things to do. She nodded, forcing a smile, as if she still believed I would come back through that door like always. But she didn't know that my keys on the counter were my last message. I had already changed the locks on the apartment, already signed the divorce papers that waited quietly in my desk drawer. When I closed the door behind me, I didn't slam it. I didn't even glance back at the house. I walked to my car, started the engine, and drove. Each mile was another thread snapping, each turn another memory dissolving into silence. By the time I pulled into the garage of my new apartment, I felt lighter than I had in years. The silence followed me inside, but it was different now. It wasn't the suffocating silence of rejection, of waiting for affection that would never come. It was clean, sharp, peaceful. I unpacked slowly, setting clothes in drawers, placing framed photos in a box I didn't bother opening. They belonged to another life. That night, she called. I didn't answer. She texted, asking when I'd be home, if I was okay, if we could talk. I stared at the messages, unreadable on the screen, then placed the phone face down on the table. For the first time, she was alone with her silence. And unlike me, she wasn't built to survive it. I poured a drink, stepped out onto the balcony, and looked out at the city lights. The air was cool, steady, unburdened. Somewhere across town, she was pacing, unraveling, realizing that the man she thought would always stay had walked away without a fight. She once told me I'd get intimacy only when she felt like it. But in the end, she learned the truth. You don't control someone by withholding. You lose them. And when they finally leave, they don't shout. They don't beg. They don't explain. They just disappear. Real men don't explode. They exit. Subscribe for more power stories.